But Necrons don't have much anti-tank. Destroyers and heavy destroyers. Time for another tactical video. Oh, okay then.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, another win with Necrons video for you, and in today's video we are going to talk about destroyers and heavy destroyers. Before that though, if you would like to keep up to date with the wonders of Warhammer 40k, then please give me a sub and hit the bell button so you don't miss an upload. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about heavy destroyers. Now there's been lots going around about Necrons and how they're not quite as efficient at taking tanks down now. And I think on the whole that probably is true. I mean, at one point I laughed in the face of any tank that was put down on the table, especially with the Gauze weapons that we had. But now it is a little bit different. Having said that, I think one of the stars of the index for certainly taking tanks down, stroke monsters, because they sort of fall under the same category, basically something with a lot of wounds, is definitely the heavy destroyers. So the first thing that people are sort of talking about is the fact that heavy destroyers, although they have an awesome gun, are quite expensive. So they work out at 75 points a model, and you can have up to 3 in a unit, so 225 points just for 3 models. It sounds expensive, doesn't it? But as I always say, you just can't really compare this edition with anything that's gone past. Yes, they are more expensive than they were, but then I remember the days when they used to be 65 points a model back in when I first started playing, and they only had 1 wound then. So we've got 3 wounds now. So let's move straight on and have a quick look at the stats. Okay, so looking at the stats, first of all they move 10 inches, quite a reasonable speed for a Necron unit in 8th edition. And of course they do have the fly special rule, which was really useful on shooting units, especially shooting unit with such a great gun. Now other stats, we've got a weapon skill and ballistic skill of 3, so that's pretty decent. We are strength 4 and toughness 5, so that toughness 5 helps to try and keep them alive if they're being shot at by sort of bolt guns, etc. People will need a 5 to wound, so that helps against small arms fire. And then they have 2 attacks now, which is pretty decent. They've always only ever had 1 attack, so 2 attacks. And 3 wounds. Now the 3 wounds is again a boost from what they were. They were 2 wounds, but just like with the Necron Wraiths, that extra wound really does make a difference. If you're being hit by weapons that do D3 damage, unless your opponent rolls a 5 and a 6, then your destroyer's got a good chance of at least being there for the next turn. Now of course if it does get destroyed, then you can use your RP to bring these guys back, both the destroyers and heavy destroyers, with full wounds. Very important, it has been FAQ'd so we know it is 100% correct. And that makes these units the most wounds unit with RP. So there's nothing else with 3 wounds that has RP. So that's really useful. They have initiative 10 and they also have a 3+ save, so pretty nice. Now gun wise at the heavy destroyer, you have a 36-inch gun with a strength 9, -4 AP, and does D6 damage. That is pretty awesome. Of course it is quite random. I know a lot of people don't like the D6 sort of wound amounts because you obviously you can maybe roll 1 or a 2, but then just think those times that you do roll the 4, 5, 6s, that's a lot of wounds coming through. And of course if you are making your army list to give you a lot of command points, you can use a command point to re-roll the damage on one of those dice, and that is very good. So don't underestimate the power of holding a command dice for re-rolling that. I would say arguably re-rolling that dice and also doing the auto morale pass are probably the 2 main things that you will be using command points for. They are mounted on a repulsor platform, which again is really useful. Sadly, you can't jump back and stuff in the assault phase like you used to be able to, and that was one of their key tactics before, the sort of peekaboo tactic. That has gone. However, we can still move and shoot the guns normally, even though they are heavy. So that is really nice. Not only that, we have the new preferred enemy rule, hardwired hatred, which basically lets you re-roll ones to hit. Now sadly it isn't on wounds and it isn't in close combat, it's just for shooting, but it's in a shooter unit, so you know, as long as we've got it there for the shooting, that's the main thing. Now of course you can enhance things a bit as usual, so you could take a Destroyer Lord and have that within range to give you re-roll of the wounds as well as re-roll of the ones, again shooting only. That's really nice. Or you could have a character with My Will Be Done, giving you that +1 to the dice roll. Now, bearing in mind that you do your re-rolls before you do your modifiers. So these guys will be, first of all you do your dice roll to hit, and then you re-roll your ones, and then you modify your dice, so you add 1 to the dice roll. So effectively you'll only miss if you roll a 1 and then another 1. So that is really good for getting the dice through, and once you've got your dice through, obviously strength 9, a very good chance of wounding most things, and then of course you've got your d6 wounds with the potential of at least re-rolling 1 dice with your command point if necessary. So the unit itself is definitely a good anti-tank, anti-monstrous creatures unit, but of course it does have its drawbacks, and that's particularly the fact that you can only take them in units of 3, which does make them quite susceptible to focus fire and being destroyed. Now I have been using this unit quite a lot in groups of 3 with great success, and not just with destroyers but just the game in general. The way to help stop your key units being targeted and focus fired down is to have an option of other key units in the army as well. So for example, if I just had a group of warriors, so 3 groups of warriors, a lord, maybe a tomb spider, a few scarabs here and there, and then I had a unit of destroyers, and the destroyers were the unit which is causing the problem, that's the unit which my enemy is going to look at to try and target first. Now if I had other elements in the list which was also causing problems, maybe I've got a Triarch Stalker in there which is then helping the Immortals or Warriors shoot their units down, maybe you've got a group of Wraiths charging forward or flayed ones coming in, maybe you've got a deep striking Monolith. All of a sudden those little group of destroyers, which yeah okay they're causing damage, but are they really the priority for your enemy? So you can either try and give your enemy other priorities to think about, or to have a lot of different priorities that he's then got to make a choice. And at least you know if he does make a choice in one direction, at least you've got those other elements as well. Okay, so that's the heavy destroyers, and we're going to now move on to destroyers, but it does really involve heavy destroyers. These are basically quite a similar unit. Of course, the heavy destroyers are in the heavy support slot, where the destroyers are in the fast attack slot. Now, having said that, they're exactly the same stats, except for the gun. So the destroyer gun is a shorter range than the heavy destroyer, so it's 24 inches. And it's strength 5. This time it's -3 AP, and it does D3 wounds. Primarily this is an infantry killer, because the main issue that you've got against tanks is the strength 5. So if you're trying to wound anything which is more than toughness 5, then you're going to struggle because you will be wounding on 5s. And that is a big difference to wounding on 4s, or indeed in wounding 3s if you were going up against, let's say, a Space Marine. So a huge difference there. 2 shots each, so quite reasonable amount of shots coming in. And really good at taking down infantry. Not quite as good as taking down tanks, but 3 wounds for each wound that gets through means that it is definitely a viable option to shoot at tanks, but ideally you should be shooting at infantry. And that's where the destroyers have the little hidden gem as such, and that's the fact that you can upgrade one of these destroyers for a heavy destroyer. So you can now embed a heavy destroyer in this unit. I've been able to do this in the past. I've never really done it because I find it was quite annoying, the fact that A, they had different ranged guns, and B, you had to shoot everything at the same unit, and one was an anti-tank gun and one was an anti-infantry gun. Well, now of course we have split fire, so you are able to shoot the heavy Gauss cannon from the heavy destroyer into one unit and then the other guns into another unit, and that makes a difference. Not only that, of course, you can hide that heavy destroyer within the unit of destroyers, keep him alive for longer, and I think that is definitely a viable option. Now, I haven't played this yet, to be fair. I've been running 3 heavy destroyers separately, and as I said, with great success. But definitely, if for example your heavy support slots are filled up elsewhere, then sticking a few heavy destroyers in your destroyer units is definitely a viable option. Now, in terms of unit sizes of the destroyers, it's quite interesting. So you can have between 1 and 6. So what is the best unit size? Well, I think just purely on the fact that they have 3 wounds with RP and they're able to come back with all 3 wounds definitely points you in the direction of a bigger unit size. Now, I prefer personally these guys to max out, so I like to have 6. Yes, it's just under 400 points, same price as a monolith. The points values don't really bother me as long as they do what they need to do, and from my experience, what I've experienced so far, the destroyers are awesome. They're really good guns, they've got good movement. You can use other elements to get them around the table if you wanted to. In one of my games I've used the Deceiver to teleport the guys across the board, because my buddy had a load of stuff in reserve. His sort of field was open. So I used Grand Illusion just to move them across the table, and that was really awesome. I was in range the whole of the game, in terrain, taking an objective, and that was really, really useful. So there are some little tricks there that you can try, and of course all of the tricks that we talked about in the heavy destroyers with the Thy Will Be Done and also the Destroyer Lord are definitely viable options for these guys, as well as for the heavy destroyers. Now also potentially the Resurrection Orb may have a use here with these 2 units. I find the Resurrection Orb is quite expensive for what it does, but with destroyers I think potentially it could be worth the investment. So you have your Destroyer Lord, the Resurrection Orb on him, and that will really help enhance your RP abilities to come back with this multi-wounded model. Unless your opponent wipes out the whole unit, but it is a lot of wounds to get through. 3 wounds each, remember, on these guys, so if you've got 6 in a unit, that's a lot of focus fire needed to take them down. And okay, if they do get taken down, once again, as always, you've got to take that in your stride, and you've got to look at the positive, that hey, my opponent's taken those down, but look at all those shots it took to take them down. And then look at the rest of your army and basically start thinking about how you can recover with the units you do have on the table, which have survived that turn of shooting, because the destroyers or heavy destroyers have taken a pounding from your opponent as opposed to your rest of your army. Whilst we have lost a lot of anti-tank stuff in our army, specifically with the Gauss weapons and their special rule, with the way that 8th edition worked with wounding, you're generally always wounding on 5s or 6s at the worst anyway. It's just the fact that those tanks are more difficult to kill, or monstrous creatures, purely on the amount of wounds that they have. It's not like you only have to take 3 hull points off a tank now. You know, a lot of these tanks have 12, 11, 15, 20 wounds. So you've got a lot more wounds to get through. In the case of, say, a Land Raider, that's a 2+ save. So even Immortals -2, you know, they've still got a 4+ save on there, which is pretty decent. So vehicles on the whole are generally harder to kill, I think, in general, for a lot of armies. Necrons definitely, considering they used to be really good at taking vehicles out, have definitely taken a hit. However, I think the destroyers and potentially the combination of destroyers and heavy destroyers is a good way to go, and they can deal out quite a lot of punishment for vehicles. I think potentially you may struggle if you've got a whole army of vehicles that you're facing, but you know, you'd have to work around that. So maybe we should make a separate video on how to deal with a whole army of vehicles, but that's not necessary for this video. As I said, this video was about destroyers and heavy destroyers. So I really hope it was useful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week in another 8th edition tactical video. Beam me up.